So one of the people quoted in the Fleet Street outlets as expressing concern at the lifting of the ban on evictions proceedings in the county courts and the court system, effective yesterday, has been Roxana Fias, the elected mayor in post in the London Borough of Newham, the East London Borough of Newham. Newham Council is one of the areas that has had, in the last few months, has had one of the highest spreads of the virus. And here, Roxana Fias is being accompanied by her cabinet deputy mayor, cabinet colleague, John Gray, who is being described as cabinet member for housing, who is quoted as saying, "We want our residents living in the private sector to be aware of their rights so they can deal any threats posed by illegal evictions. We have launched media campaign highlighting the issues and signposting anyone at risk or under threat to our services which can support them. Our private sector housing standards team is also handing out business cards to tenants at risk, which include where to get help, information on the eviction process, and details of what the police can do to help prevent illegal evictions and harassment. The council and the police have worked together to produce the business cards in recognition that as a joined-up approach is needed when dealing with illegal evictions and harassment." Now, this is all very positive spin by the Roxana Fias camp. But the experience of people who are at the receiving end of illegal behavior and lying and robbery of their entitlements by the Newham Council, just like Tower Hamlets Council, but we are talking about Newham Council for the minute. That is something that is not included in the spin by the Newham Council's media office there on the internet. And the evidence is that Roxana Fias has been allowing Newham Council's employees to harass people, to stop their benefits, that is, local housing allowance payments, by inventing series of lies against the particular targets. And one case that this campaign and this program is very much aware of and is involved in updating on is the case of a claimant for local housing allowance, which is the equivalent of the housing benefit that is applicable to people who are council housing tenants. So local housing allowance is the equivalent that is available to people in low income, and based on their kind of means, if they are tenants in a privately rented accommodation. So in this case, Newham Council's housing benefit allocation personnel lied about a crucial matter affecting the entitlement of the local housing allowance, full sum of the local housing allowance. And they invented that lie as a way of denying the applicant the particular kind of benefit. Now that immediately puts that particular targeted individual at daily risk of losing their home. Daily risk of losing their home. Daily possibility of their being harassed by their particular kind of contractor, if you like, the person who claims to have rent kind of collection powers against them. So this has been going on for the best part of the last 4 years. And this was made known to Ruxana Fiaz when she became mayor after Robin Wales was replaced at the May 2018 mayoral election in Newham. So Ruxana Fiaz knows, as does John Gray, all the facts that the Newham Council employees have been lying. And the facts have been known to them. John Gray and Ruxana Fiaz, both of them, and just to get the Ruxana Fiaz interview aired on the 12th of March 2018, just days before it was announced that she was the Newham Labour Party's selected candidate to stand as the Labour Party's candidate at the election for mayor held in May 2018. Here is
what Labour Party done for the and it's not just because of the elections. Her surge of the Labour.
This is the piece.
She seek the nomination for the Labour Party.
During this period where very many of our Noom residents, our families, are struggling in these tough times. We have an economy that has stagnated. We have an average, salary, an annual salary of families that earn something in the region of £25,000 to £26,000. The cost of living is very pressurised. We have a council that is essentially not providing our Newham residents some of the key things that they need, despite all the pressures facing all local authorities in terms of budget pressures. We need housing. We need genuinely affordable housing. And my main key priority, if I'm elected, the Labour candidate for the Mayor of Newham, and then, have the privilege of being elected by the Newham residents as their Mayor, I am going to be delivering one of the most ambitious housing build programmes where there's going to be many more homes at social rent levels where our communities can actually afford to stay in Newham, because at the moment they're being driven out.
Your party ran the borough last 100 years?
It's a long-standing Labour stronghold. It's a proud and privileged achievement. We are the birthplace of the Labour Party. Our founding, leader, Keir Hardie, was the first MP for West Ham constituency. So I very much am excited at the prospect of standing on the shoulder of historical giants. But, as was said earlier, there are many giants from our communities that I feel proud to be standing on the shoulders of in terms of breaking glass ceilings and showing young people from, our backgrounds, be you Pakistani, be you Bangladeshi, be you Indian, be you white working class, be you Black Caribbean, Black African, that if I can do it, being, having been born in Myland Hospital, I grew up in Newham, I went to local schools. If I can achieve this level of success and this position, anyone can.
Definitely. One thing I want to add, because Ruxana ko isoin tain 1000 gor tain your commitment you also. As a civil engineer, he's a civil engineer, and that is very possible. It's not something. And যদি হইতা 25,000 30,000 40,000 100,000 অত তো মানে হই ইলেকশন লাগে 1,000 is very doable, In fact, it will understatement. And Amizani, Ruxana Taner commitment is 110%. And Shokale Utoin Monohoy Sweater, still on her feet. She's still on her feet. And it's not just because of the elections. Her surgery is probably Manatanja Councillor surgery time hold her. It a cook regularly and both manchara time they hoin. At time extra. At time to OB Faisoin. Ruxana Pai's OB. I mean, it's a
charitable British Empire. OB. Okay.
Well, so what I'm saying is, why I'm bringing this point, realistically, the commitment Ruxana is bringing is realistic. And I can vouch for this 100%. 1,000 homes is very doable. People would have said...
So, I mean, this is something, sorry. Historically, under the terms, ethnic minority people, they supported Labour Party.
Yeah.
Why? What Labour Party done for the black, Asian or ethnic minority people? What they done for them?
One thing, I mean, definitely I have to say, the Labour Party under especially ethnic minority, lagi, a working class, and people with less privileged background, always they've supported and always they have helped us. But in this instance, Ruxana Zeta proposed for that, like, under short housing a problem, manush lamba waiting list to
waiting list
in Newham we have 25,000
waiting list
on the waiting list
for last how many years?
It's steadily grown as of September.
Because in Ruxana, in Tower Hamlets, it's 23,000 people. They are in the waiting list.
Look, it was said earlier, 1,000 homes, council-owned homes at social rent levels is realistic. I have more ambition for Newham. We have enough land, either owned by Newham Council or by the GLA, to build 35,000 homes in Newham. I am determined, as the next Newham Labour Mayor, to ensure that we maximise at all possible stages through the planning application process by pushing back on developers who are always attempting to maximise their profits, that we meet our own policy objectives in terms of our local plan and also the objectives of the London plan being pushed by our London Labour Mayor, Sadiq Khan, that we maximise to the best possible point at least 50% of genuinely affordable houses, of which many would be at social rent levels. As of September 2017, 25,000 people on our waiting list, 4,500 families homeless, living in some of the most appalling conditions with young children, and the impact that has in terms of educational attainment. They're living in cramped homes, in homes where there is damp. Most recently, I've been dealing with a case of a man who lives in a one-bedroom cramped home, 4 children, his wife, and he's desperate to move and to improve his living environment for him and his family, but he's languishing on our waiting list. For a Labour mayor who's been in office for 23 years as either leader of the council or mayor of Newham, that is unacceptable. Despite him, launching this big programme called Red Door Ventures in 2014, this is going to be bringing homes for our residents. We are only yet, after 4 years, we've only seen 32 housing units coming through the delivery. That's not good enough. And he has clearly dropped the ball in terms of his inability to deal with the emerging and now raging housing crisis in London, and that's not acceptable, and it's criminal. And I am going to be the mayoral candidate and the mayor of Newham that will deliver for the people of Newham genuinely affordable, high-quality homes at a mix of tenure, social rents, because as I said earlier, our average annual salary for Newham residents is £25,000 to £26,000. And our residents can't afford the high rates that are now increasing. I was speaking to a young person last weekend and he was saying, I got married 2 years ago. I'm still living, in my parents' home. Me and my wife want to be able to, live independently, not because I don't love my parents and I don't want to be close to my family, but we need to be thinking about raising our own family. But he can't afford to buy a house in Newham. I can't afford to buy a house in Newham, and that's not acceptable.
I can understand it when politicians like you and other politicians when they talk about affordable housing. What do you mean by affordable housing?
Absolutely, affordable housing in this current day context is not affordable for 9 out of 10 Londoners. We have too many people in terms of too many overseas investors picking up properties. We have developers pushing and maximising their profits. We as a council have to now start pushing back and saying, no, we have got a policy objective to have more homes at genuinely affordable rent levels. We need to have options for people to part buy, part rent in order to enable them to get onto the housing ladder. But what you don't do as a Labour mayor in a borough where there's an acute housing crisis, as there is across London, you do not pass over 250 of your own council homes to an external body that you have set up so that they can be sold on the market. That's what this current mayor is doing. Every single year, 250 council homes are being passed to this other company that we have set up as a Labour council and being sold so people can buy them. We've got 25,000 people on the waiting list and they're languishing.
Sorry, I'm going to emphasize what I'm saying. Thank you, social affordable. But I'll spell affordable. Affordable heater.
Affordable is a political slogan. It's a political slogan, isn't it? What do you think?
It's not a political slogan because I think
it's a slogan. I don't know, you agree with me or not?
I think affordable housing has become meaningless. Affordable housing in the London context.
Affordable housing for what? And affordable housing for who?
Exactly. As I said earlier, 9 out of 10 Londoners cannot afford to buy.
Exactly. They're going to Scotland.
Absolutely. Out of London.
Social affordable. This is the great thing. Both mentioned and so can it rent it's not going to be the extortionate out the woods.
So it's going to be around 60% of market rates. At the moment, affordable is 80% of market rates. There are flats being sold or rented out in the private rented sector through our own company that we have set up at £1,600 a month. We are in a situation where Londoners, new residents, coming up to two-thirds of their salary is going towards rent. That's not sustainable. It's not sustainable in Newham. It's not sustainable for us.
If my wages is £25,000 a year, I can afford this £2,000 rent for that.
Absolutely. So Newham, for the last 12 years, 15 years, has been saying to everyone, Newham is a place where people can work, live and stay. Actually, the reality is Newham is a place that people can't live, work and stay.
I can't believe that. প্রিয় দর্শক, আমরা কথা বলছি নিউহামের পলিটিক্স নিয়ে এবং নিউহামের আগামী যে নির্বাচন, সেই নির্বাচনে রুকসানা পিয়াজ লেবার পার্টির নমিনেশনের জন্য তিনি ফাইট করছেন এবং তিনি আশা করছেন।
So this is the representative viewing of the interview that was aired on the 12th of March 2018 by Rukhsana Fiaz making all these claims. But on the evidence that exists, Rukhsana Fiaz has been refusing to stop the lies perpetrated against a lawful, valid, legal, perfectly legitimate applicant for local housing allowance. And Rukhsana Fiaz knows the identity or identities of the liars. She knows the details of the lies, and she has refused to alter or stop the lies and the lying. Now, in the period that she has been in post, Rukhsana Fiaz was made aware of other criminally conceived lies by employees in Newham Council. And we shall be covering some of the lies that Rukhsana Fayaz has been covering up and in denial. Now, on the Independent Online, dated the 13th of May 2018, the Independent's social affairs correspondent, May Bullman, published the piece with this headline. Now, the reading of this headline is: Mother describes being forced to drink her baby's milk as people living with poverty come forward to tell United Nations envoy their stories. This mother was describing this at a meeting held in the Barking Road on the 12th of November 2018, where the then United Nations envoy visiting the UK, Philip Alston, was present. And the picture of Rukhsana Fayaz speaking at that very meeting, while Alston in the white shirt is seen behind her. This is the picture that was published with that piece by May Bullman on the Independent Online. Now the item started: people suffering extreme levels of deprivation in London have told the United Nations Poverty Envoy how government-inflicted austerity has left them homeless, hungry, and at times forced into exploitation. Now that paragraph contains a lie and a denial. Government-inflicted austerity. This has nothing to do with the behavior of Newham Council's employee who cruelly forced the mother of a child to survive on drinking the milk that was meant for her child. During a packed out meeting in Newham, East London, Philip Alston heard directly from migrant women, people with disabilities, and domestic abuse survivors who gave personal accounts of how welfare cuts had affected them. Now, this is again continuation of the lie about welfare cuts. Cruelty is nothing to do with the welfare cuts and the level of welfare cuts that could be even established. So, this is the third paragraph where it is saying, in one highly charged account, a West African mother with a baby strapped to her back explained through tears how she had to wait for 20 hours outside social services, that is, social services of Newham Council, after fleeing an abusive relationship during which she became so hungry she had to drink her child's milk. 20 hours outside these social services, that is one day, more than a day. 20 hours, think about that. So other stories included a mentally unwell man who was fined for making a mistake on his universal credit application families with young children forced to live in a flea-infested houses, and a heavily pregnant woman having to sleep rough in a park. Now, this is the story that goes on a bit more about other aspects, and then we shall come to the apology by Roxana Fiaz. Okay. After hearing the witness statements, Newham's mayor Roxana Fiaz said, "Can I just apologize on behalf of myself as mayor of Newham and on behalf of the council that you experienced," that is the woman who was forced to stand waiting 20 hours and forced to drink the milk meant for her child, "that you experienced that treatment at the hands of people that we employ. It should not have happened. This treatment of our residents, regardless of their circumstances, their backgrounds, of how long they have been here, has to stop." Now, this is the thing that she said, that this treatment has to stop, but it hasn't stopped. The treatment of the particular claimant denied local housing allowance for 4 years has not stopped. Newham Council's lying employees are still in place, and they're still lying, and they're still refusing to withdraw their lies and to pay the full amount of local housing allowance that has been owed to the particular tenant of a private accommodation since the beginning of July 2016. And in June 2018, a month after Roxana Fiaz was elected, the particular claimant made the facts known to the council as the first kind of updates, because the person in occupation of the post of mayor had changed. So they started that in June. And the communications were addressed to the council's so-called democratic services. And the democratic services kind of clerked and managed a meeting, a session of the scrutiny committee of Newham Council. And because of the background of the particular applicant against the particular set of lies by the particular set of employees in Newham Council, the scrutiny committee actually abandoned its scrutiny role and became defensive of the liars fronted by Roxana Fiaz. A liars regime fronted by Roxana Fiaz. So that was June 2018. And since June 2018, Roxana Fiaz has had communication sent to her about the details of the lies. And she has not acted anywhere near what she reportedly said to the mother at the meeting on the 12th of November 2018 in front of the then envoy on poverty, the United Nations envoy on poverty visiting the UK, Philip Alston. And Philip Alston himself had been told in detailed communication sent to him before he retired from that post, the set of lies and the strings of lies perpetrated by Newham Council with the active participation of Roxana Fiaz. So this week's publicity by Roxana Fiaz saying that the ban on evictions would endanger people and people's lives is a completely untruthful representation and a spin by Roxana Fiaz. And the statement attributed to John Gray is an equally dishonest statement. It's a lie. And this takes us back to what I was saying in the previous edition, the first edition, about Jeremy Corbyn spieling about effectively what they say, the cash-strapped local councils. The point is, councils have always been funded, always, meaning since the popular councillors took their successful action in defense of their poor kind of constituents. So the councils have been, one way or another, in one kind of program or another, councils have been in receipt of funding from the central government. One is on grounds of at least addressing some of the poverty, but other is the need for the central government to use local councils as agencies for administering various central government programs, including the payment of housing benefit, which is part of the welfare benefit, the local housing allowance. These are all directly related to levels of income and the consequent levels of experience of poverty. And yet, Roxana Fias has been lying for the lies of the liars in the Neom Council for the last 4 years. And she has been lying for the last 2 years, and then May, June, July, August, September, so 2 years and 4 months. So Roxana Fias is an embodiment of the lying kind of rebuttal to the myth that is created by and fostered by the likes of Jeremy Corbyn even now. And there is no presence, there is no intervention by Keir Starmer against poverty, let alone against the violations of the charters, the treaties, the conventions, the declarations and the agreements that exist and that have been signed up to by the UK. And when the UK signed up to those, they signed up to those in order to uphold the aims and the values, to uphold the rights and protect the rights of the people affected by the various decisions in the various fields, various parts of the life of the people. So when Philip Alston published his report, Philip Alston published his report a few months after he visited Newham. He visited a number of places, including places in Scotland and places in the Northeast. And his preliminary report, I think, was published on the 16th of November 2018. Let's check this. Okay, on the 19th of November, Amber Rudd was reported by The Guardian Online as condemning UN poverty report in combative return to frontline politics. Now, Amber Rudd returned to politics, according to this one, byline to Peter Walker, political correspondent, dated Monday the 19th of November 2018 at 1842 GMT. And it started by saying Amber Rudd has used her first appearance in the House of Commons as Work and Pension Secretary to condemn a UN inquiry into poverty in the UK over what she said was the extraordinary political nature of its language. In a sometimes combative appearance at the departmental questions, 3 days after she was appointed in place of Esther McBee, who resigned in protest at Theresa May's Brexit deal, Rudd condemned the report by Philip Alston, the UN's rapporteur on extreme poverty and human rights. At the end of a 2-week trip to the UK, Alston said the government had inflicted poverty on people through austerity and called levels of child poverty not just a disgrace but a social calamity and an economic disaster. Now, all of these words were being published and being kind of attributed to various people concerned 2 calendar years before the pandemic arrived, and 2 calendar years, 2 months from now, it will be 2 actual years. Alston also attacked universal credit, which had been beset by problems during McVeigh's time in the job. Amber Rudd, that is, returning to the cabinet 7 months after stepping down as Home Secretary amid the Windrush scandal, said she profoundly disagreed with Alston's approach. Asked by her Labour Party shadow counterpart, Margaret Greenwood, about the report's criticism of the government's new all-in-one working benefit system, Rudd said, "I have seen the report by the rapporteur. I have read it over the weekend, and I must say I was disappointed, to say the least, by the extraordinary political nature of his language. We on this side of the house will always engage with professionals, with experts, with NGOs. We are not so proud that we don't think we can learn as we try to adjust universal credit for the benefit of everybody." But that sort of language was wholly inappropriate and discredited a lot of what he was saying. She said, "But we look forward to working with experts in the area to make sure we get the right outcome for the people who we want to look after." Asked about the tone of the UN report, May's spokesman said, "We strongly disagree with the analysis." Now, all of this, remember, in the context of the treatment of people in poverty and people cast in dangerous states of losing their homes. And this is what Roxana Fayaz has been doing for the last 2 years since she became mayor in May 2018. She has been denying the duty she owes to apologize for the lies and the cruelty inflicted on the particular claimant by the lying employees in post. That is in contrast to her open apology to the mother who was speaking in front of the UN envoy on the 12th of November 2018. And Roxana Fayaz, 2 years later, has now published a condemnation of the UK government's handling of the rights of the people under attack by eviction actions. And as John Gray has said as well, so they have made a long list of claims in support of the rights of the targets of evictions and harassment by private sector landlords. This private sector harassment, evictions, is something that we shall be devoting a lot more time and space and content on, because it is that central. It is that central to the analysis and the diagnosis of what is wrong in society in the UK, as the wrong is done by local councils like Newham, local councils like Tower Hamlets, and other local councils, most local councils. And as these liars, so-called local councils, are being still peddled and spieled for by the likes of Jeremy Corbyn, who becomes discredited additionally because he is still in denial of the facts and the possibility that council employees can be as cruel as the Neom Council employees have been, for which Roxana Fiaz apologized on this 12th of November 2018, but has failed to apologize for the systematic conspiracy and lies and the robbery of the housing benefit robbery perpetrated by another group of Neom Council employees with her knowledge, because she has been aware of the previous record of these liars. And since she took over and since she became aware or made aware of the evidence and the perpetration, she and the liar, her co-lying deputy mayor, the liar John Gray, they have been committing lies, perpetrating lies, and they've been shielding these liars in place. So put that on the table, and that kind of evidence has been sent to Philip Alston. Had been sent, that kind of evidence had been sent to Philip Alston before he retired, before he actually presented his final report at a do in Geneva about the state of UK poverty and the role of the UK government and agencies. And this is an exclusive diagnostic content. And we can reveal that Alston was told that his report was not even 10% accurate. It is the opposite view to what Amber Rudd and Theresa May said. 90% of Philip Alston's report was in denial of the grossness and the extent of and the extensive nature of the lies being perpetrated by local councils like Neom Council and the county courts and the central government Department for Want, Poverty and Hopelessness Creation. DWP, Department of Deprivation, Want and Poverty Creation, DWP. Its bogus name is Department for Work and Pensions, but it never has acted as Department for Work and Pensions. It has been always the vehicle for creating want and deprivation, denial, displacement, destitution, and poverty, and penalties and punishment. So what has been happening in the wake of the lifting of the ban on evictions by the current conservative government and the issuing and the circulation of the words of concern attributed to the likes of Roxana Fiaz and her lying co-liar John Gray, is this, that they are actually getting away with their lying and their perpetrations of threats against people in the most vulnerable positions about losing their homes or have been or being in the middle of terrible, traumatic years of suffering after previously losing their homes. So that doesn't even take into account the possibility that these people who have been attacked by being denied their housing rights, by being denied their local housing allowance rights, could also have been being denied their creative, ordinary working contribution to society and humanity rights, because it has been assumed totally irresponsibly and inaccurately and falsely that people who are homeless or people who are evicted are just people evicted from a bad seat or evicted out of a house where they have a bed. It's not the case. It's not just the sleeping arrangement. It is the entirety of the world. Access to the entirety of the world. Access by the individual to the entirety of the potentials and the possibilities of the world that they have been robbed of. So they can't do anything because they can't settle down in a place. And if all of these uncertainties and violations are multiplied and translated into the lives of only a small number of people, say one person, say 10 persons have been treated to serial losses of their homes over decades. Just imagine that. That is part of the evidence that exists. That has been happening in Britain. It's never even hinted at in the newspapers, including the Guardian, including in the Daily Mirror, including in the Communist Party Morning Star, that people have been attacked by their housing rights being taken away from them or robbed from them through no fault of their own whatsoever. So if you can imagine a group of people or a class of people like that being robbed of their homes and housing rights, then you can also add in that imaginary kind of setting scenario the facts of their creative, positive, contributory kind of roles in society to making society better in any kind of way, any field that they have been able to work but have been prevented from working. Then add, supposing there is an artist, a painter, or a composer. Can you imagine any of these attributes being associated with somebody who has been evicted? Because eviction never includes those things, those qualities. Eviction presumes the worst level of ability on the part of the evicted or on the part of the victim of eviction. So therefore, what we have to understand about the situation where the British government is being completely exposed today, as it has been exposed in the last 8 months or so, as being unfit, unable, unaccountable, uncaring, and incompetent and ignorant. To understand that, you have to take into account all the components of what constitutes government. It's not good enough just saying, looking at the serial liar, overly now absolutely exposed as a completely unfit person for public office, Boris Johnson. It is not good enough. It's not explanation enough. It's not factual enough to look at him or even pour over his kind of dishonorably kind of spent career, deceiving, lying, denying, abusing, and all the rest of it. Even if all the facts of Boris Johnson's dishonest career were to be recounted, that would not come anywhere near explaining the morass, the complete unfitness of the various agencies and the various experts and the various authorities to serve the people who are supposedly being served by our great country. That is the phrase that Theresa May used yesterday. The great country is not serving the people, as the Windrush scandal showed, as the hostile environment showed. So therefore, what we have to look at is the actual evidence. The newspapers are not. The diagnosis of Fleet Street is here, that the newspapers don't have any understanding, any awareness, any recognition of any of these things that we have been here talking about for the last, let's say, 40 minutes. And in the context, in every edition. So they're saying the second shutdown begins, but it has got no A to Z, and it has got no comparisons. There is a shutdown, and there are people already divided and split. Every day there is this thing that is quite predictable, that there are two opinions. One side says that they agree with the shutdown and the other side said they don't. But that's it. But that does not give the facts and the evidence. For example, what are the local councils doing with the police? What are they saying? What are their kind of values? Do they say that these people who are being targeted for attacks via evictions are as good human beings as they themselves, the councillors or the Mayor Rukhsana Fiaz or her deputy John Gray? Does Gray respect people as being even equal to him as human beings? Because if he did, he would not be lying with Rukhsana Fiaz for the liars who have been robbing the claimant of the local housing allowance. Now, Philip Alston was told about the fact that he was leaving out these kind of factors, and when he said austerity, that was completely false and artificial, because austerity is only one component of the process of poverty creation, the agenda of poverty creation, and the agenda of robbing people who can be targeted for robbery by the local councils, who then abuse the money that they rob off these people. So it is quite easy and convenient to say that the central government, and this time it's the Conservative government, which is responsible for the austerity or the cuts. But that's not the story. That's not even 90% of the story. The 90% of the story is in the courts, where the courts act as rubber stamps against the targets of eviction proceedings and housing robbery proceedings, and then the councils. And the councils have got various points of contact with the targets of the poverty creation and displacement program. And then there is the media. The media doesn't have any coverage of the stories of how Council X or Council Y or Council Z has been robbing victims of what is now, in the parlance of today, the eviction attacks. And the local elected councillors are completely deaf and blind and totally mute, either voluntarily because they have got an understanding with the leadership of the council that if they keep quiet, they will be okay, and they will get the allowances, and they would get, to use the Thatcherite phrase or word, preferment. They would get extra kind of platforms which they can justify to fleece the public and get extra allowance and extra money. Altogether, councillors have been reduced to elected stooges and parasites. They feed off the electorate's name between elections. So the 4 years normally between the elections. And those 4 years they spent fleecing the electorate and exposing or helping the local council, the council executive, to fleece and rob and deny and deprive and displace and send away from the local communities people that are in poverty. The claim that Rukhsana Fiaz made in that particular program, that people are not able to afford to live in their own communities, they are being sent away. This is what she has been doing. Note that. Rukhsana Fiaz spoke on a television channel, ethnicity-linked television channel, on 12th of March 2018, literally days before she was officially declared as the Labour Party's candidate for Mayor of Neom. In that, she said a lot of things about housing, mostly about housing. But she never said a word about holding the council accountable to the victims of council corruption and housing. And she was able to do that. She was allowed to do that because the presenter did not ask her these questions. The presenter did not appear to know what goes on inside the councils. not to the extent that he should have known when she allowed that platform to that particular kind of candidate to spew her candidacy. So Rukhsana Fiaz said that people can't afford because their average salary was under £30,000, so they couldn't afford the housing, to rent the housing or let alone buy the housing in Newham, but they couldn't even afford to stay there. That is what she is saying. Now her lying collusion, since she took over, she continued the lying collusion and denial of her predecessor in post, Robin Wales. Her lying collusion and John Gray's lying collusion with that group of liars in the housing benefit section has been doing precisely what she was appearing to be condemning when she appeared to kind of present herself as an alternative and a better candidate for the people of Newham than Robin Wales, then incumbent, on the date 12th of March 2018 when she appeared on that program. And Philip Alston's report completely leaves aside all of that. Now, Philip Alston is also an academic in the University of New York, and is described as a professor of law. If he is a professor of law, then he is professing lies, or he is professing untruths, and he is professing ignorance. The British legal system is a corrupt system. Not only that, it is made worse by its being a very racist system, and it is completely out of date. Any actual student of constitutionality, human rights, and international values that have kind of appeared since the foundation of the United Nations, whose tokenistic 75th anniversary is being observed this week, and with the unnecessarily overdue exposition to the figure and image of Anthony Guterres, the current Secretary General, who is a very opportunistic Secretary General, of which we shall be talking about in the later editions and throughout this kind of week of the marking of the United Nations 75th founding anniversary. The international forums that have been appearing as part of the consequences of the activities of the United Nations include the Human Rights Commission. And Philip Alston was a commissioner who was appointed Commissioner for Poverty and Human Rights, partly because of the kind of racist, colonialist kind of presumptions and assumptions that dominate the United Nations now, even now. Because if he were an Asian or African, he would not be appointed to that post in any case, and he would not be allowed the kind of media exposure that he personally was given to all the countries that he visited in that capacity. Essentially, Alston is part of the legal corruption bureaucracy. And that bureaucracy is based on the denial of fundamental rights that otherwise are valuable and are launched and championed by various United Nations declarations. So if Alston were to come to the UK and appear as a claimant in person, as a litigant in person, say in the Queen's Bench Division in the High Court in London, and if he were to be appearing as an Asian or an African, not as a white person, what he is, an Australian white person, he would not be getting even a fraction, even 1% of the vindication or the opportunity or the airing of his rights through that process. Because the judiciary and the clerking of the judiciary, the administrative personnel who are not members of the judiciary as such, or not in post as members of the judiciary, they are in post for administration. The court system are corrupt, and the corruption is aggravated by the racism of the persons and the racism of the narrative, racism of the agenda that is operated through the court system. So that's the case in the Queen's Bench Division, which in the UK's case, the biggest part of the High Court that has the highest number, largest number of courts and jurisdiction over the highest number of issues, including defamation. So what happened in the case of the visit by Philip Alston of Newham is also relevant to the behavior of the Queen's Bench Division as a court for seeking remedies against defamers. And this particular claimant, or this particular claim that is the subject of the references so far, where the Newham Council's lawyers lied in a way that affected the particular person, the claimant's material interests and rights, which is allowed in the current legislation, which is the 2013 Defamation Act. So the applicant made an application in defamation citing the 2013 Defamation Act against the Newham Council in the High Court. And the High Court personnel put up a series of illegal and criminally conceived obstructions so that the hearing was never listed, it was not accepted. Why it was not accepted, how it was not accepted is part of the same corruption in the legal bureaucracy that I have talked about, and is also to be found in the behavior of the tribunals. Let's say, for example, in this case, in this context, tribunals are relevant. The same applicant never applied for a tribunal hearing of any claim against Newham Council, liars behaving in that criminal way. And yet, that claim or the claimant was referred to a tribunal by the liars themselves. Imagine a group of offenders and criminals and thugs filing a case against their thuggery and crimes. You cannot imagine that, because they had to be supremely confident of being allowed to get away. And that is what Newham Council, lying, perpetrating criminals, thought they would do. So they referred their claim to a tribunal, but on that kind of detail, they forgot that only because they referred the issue to the tribunal did not make that compliant with the duties they had, obligations they had under the various treaties, declarations, charters, etc. And they did a number of other wrongs with the collusion of the tribunal bureaucracy. They didn't send a representative to the tribunal hearing that was staged in September. This is September 2017. And the tribunal judge was herself a liar and a denier and a racist. And they knew that. Newham Council liars knew that the tribunal would be likely another obstruction, aiding their obstruction, their lying. And so this tribunal charade took place over another year or 18 months, and the claimant, on the record, for the records, not accepting for a minute that this should have been referred to the tribunal, but on the records and for the records, asserted the truth of the matter and the records against the criminals in Newham Council and against the racist liars active as tribunal judges at various stages in the tribunal. So Philip Alston never kind of even mentioned one sentence as a possibility that these kind of factors might be coming to play. So his reference to the austerity was an artificial reference, which was just cut and pasted, if you like, from the British press reports. I mean, the least they could do was to mention austerity, and everyone mentioned austerity. And austerity is not a poverty-creating word. Austerity is a kind of morally conceived word about personal sacrifice and all the rest of it. So austerity doesn't give an image of being put in a nightmare position of hunger, starvation, and destitution on a daily basis. So he mentioned austerity, and he didn't even mention the court system. He didn't mention the obstruction of the High Court, and he didn't mention the criminality of the council. He didn't mention the absence of any accountability against all these layers of liars. Now, all of these are factors that are actively at play in creating a situation where somebody is evicted. How many newspapers? There is no newspaper that ever has published any of this. Nor has, for that matter, this been anticipated in any of the works of Charles Dickens or of the chronicler of the so-called law codes, John Mortimer, who was a barrister himself and wrote a number of books about the so-called legal practice and legal profession. He never, ever mentioned any of these possibilities. And there is nothing in Shakespeare's works, of course. And there is nothing in any of the other so-called writers, fiction writers' works about what goes on in creating poverty in this country, in perpetuating poverty in this country, in perpetrating poverty in this country on a purpose, on a political, personal, and legally kind of fictionalized and covered up pretext and series of pretexts. And there is no agenda, never has been. There has never been any agenda in the Labour Party manifestos. There has never been any agenda in the Labour Party manifesto for the last 60 years or 70 years to address any of this. And all of these have been present, not in the particular detail that is related to one particular current or contemporary case, but all of these possibilities and factors have been present. And so, for example, the ruling by the deputy High Court judge or a junior High Court kind of judge post holder or judicial post holder called Anthony Thornton. His report dated the 14th of October 2014 against London Borough of Southwark Council and the group of housing department or housing section employees who plotted for years and conspired for years against a unnamed Ethiopian man, the case being referred to as AA versus the London Borough of Southwark Council. The man remains anonymous to this day anyway. So they conspired against the particular victim of their harassment, and they conspired effectively for a long time, and they robbed and they stole his storage devices which contained his intellectual work and other authored materials and evidence. And nowhere in the chain of bureaucracy within Southwark Council was there any avenue, any forum, any place, any stop where these criminals could be identified, let alone held to account, let alone be disciplined. And Anthony Thornton's case ruling was an absolutely stunning exception that gives the lie to the normalcy of the council's lying. So, what he said applies both to the behavior of Newham Council's housing benefit section liars and also to the leadership of the Newham Council. And the same applies to, in a separate kind of segment of the same series of lies perpetrated by council, the separate segments or series of segments that are relatable to and attributable to and located in the behavior of Tower Hamlets Council, which is next door to Newham. And the fact that the incumbent in place during most of that time has been Lutfur Rahman, as in the name of Tower Hamlets people, as elected mayor of Tower Hamlets, and the fact that there has been Roxana Fiaz in Newham in place at the expense of the people of Newham as elected mayor. These facts normally are presented by the peddlers of the lie that ethnicity is a good thing when it comes to being used as a criteria for selecting as candidate any of the ethnic kind of members in areas like Newham and in Tower Hamlets. Now that is a lie, big lie. Ethnicity in that kind of situation is used to not only justify liars and lies and criminality against ordinary people and against ordinary claims and against ordinary entitlements, but it is an additional aggravation of the violations, as happened in Tower Hamlets, as happened in Newham, and as is happening in Newham, as is happening in Tower Hamlets, two segments still in progress. And in Sadak, it was a white person, not an ethnicity kind of linked candidate. The leader has been a white male who is supposedly a licensed law trader. Despite the fact that he is a licensed law trader, he is as corrupt, as dishonest, as against all the founding values of the Labour Party as he could be. And he's been allowed to stay in post, and he has been allowed to stay in post without having to be held to account or without being held to account for the lies and criminalities and the robbery and thefts committed against that man by the employees in the housing section of the Sadak Council. So Philip Alston is in denial and is in criminal denial of these facts, and his report didn't include any possibility that this kind of crimes were being committed or could be committed by local councils who were complaining at the same time against the conservative government's austerity policies, while they were inflicting 10 times worse criminal violations against targeted victims in their own boroughs. Think about that. That is not going to be in the papers. So this is the other diagnostic angle on the emptiness of Fleet Street. This is coming to what time? Just 5 minutes to 3 in the afternoon GMT. That is 14:54 GMT on Tuesday, the 22nd of September 2020. We shall be continuing